How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to take a look at some disturbing and terrifying Reddit stories, and we're just going to get right into the video. But real quick, if you like the video, please consider subscribing because it really helps me out a lot. And with that being said, let's get right into it. I was in prison for 15 years. There was a skinwalker in there with us. A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more than anyone wanted to know about. It all started with the prison legend. Supposedly, years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning we'd be woken up and expected to stand near the front of our cells while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year ago, before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during this check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over him, loosely fitting, draped over him. Apparently looked like a real monster. The scariest things were though, was the guy was wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into the prison, let alone a cell. What's worse is that they couldn't even figure out who the hell he was. He wasn't documented anywhere. And what's worse than that? They never even found the body of the man of the skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know. And I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him. The skinwalker. Didn't help that the other guy never talked apparently. Anyways, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently, the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it had happened, and just about everyone in Gen Pop felt all the better because of it. I heard about the story on the second day of my stay. Hell of a story to hear, to place in your home for the foreseeable future. Now onto the real stuff though. Sure, that guy was the skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old lifer Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive round one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell the mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech, but not replicate it. They twitch maniacally. They have an unnatural gait while walking, but apparently they got better with experience. The old Navajo guy, his name is Carl, said that he was sure that there was an actual one among the prisoners, slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grand Master Skinwalker. At one point, apparently he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell it was your cellmate for a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect the skinwalker to jump at any opportunity for a kill, but this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it, and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought for years. A lot of guys found humor in it, a lot more were really on edge about it. Every once in a while in prison, people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate, swinging in front of your bunk, strung up around by the neck, by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tended to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be any outburst at dinner or a silent rope tied up in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time. They would let their hair hang in front of their face. No one liked to talk about it. Like if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy, but I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything, but every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where, without anyone knowing else beforehand. Then there were the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between a pig's dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about. Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated in the night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows flit across my walls on a regular occasion when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked at my back wall, and found a perfect silhouette of a person standing there. But when I looked, my bunkmate was asleep and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps, everyone hated the footsteps. They were the scariest part in the night, sometimes more rarely than the shadows. You would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other end in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanly fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agreed. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear it was nearly my turn about a week ago before I was discharged. My cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped in the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep of course, but never more than a few minutes at a time. Never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing? I woke up one night to him somehow shaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get past anything my shoulder through them. The worst part though, he was coming back into our cell. On my day of my release, I didn't say a word to him, just left. He seemed fine with it. So was I. I had made it through 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and for all I know, skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gates as a free man. As I walked along the fence for the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate, standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look over the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own, on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates, and twitching maniacally. And that's the end of this post. There's no part 2, but before we go on to the next one, I just gotta say, I really enjoyed this story. I always love skinwalker stories. They're always so scary and so well written, and this one especially. It was a very good story. So yeah, let's get on to the next one. I received my brother's wedding announcement in the mail. I've never seen his wife before, and apparently, neither has he. I almost missed it altogether, buried as it was under all the junk mail and pre-approved credit cards and offers. The announcement was printed on a 7x5 piece of white cardstock. The right side featured a photo of a couple, while the left bore a simple message in plain font. Just married, David and Emma, June 6th, Acadia. I read that strangely unceremonious message twice as I stood in front of my mailbox, trying to recall how I knew the couple. The only David I knew was my brother, who was not only single but perhaps the most single man I've ever known. I looked over the photo of the happy couple, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say my jaw dropped. The man in the picture was in fact my younger brother. He was strolling down the beach, hand in hand with a young woman. Both of them caught mid-laugh. He gazed accordingly at the woman, at Emma, I guess, who was covering the top half of her face with her free hand. I thought it was strange that she'd be obscuring her own eyes in a wedding announcement photo, but the card itself was so strange that I didn't dwell on her pose. The announcement was either a prank, which could be remarkably out of character for my humorless sibling, or David had subverted my every expectation and eloped. Once I got past the initial shock of the card, I went back inside, tossed the junk mail, and gave David a call. It was evening where he was, but not so late where he would have been asleep. He picked up after 6 rings. Well, Mazel Tov, I told him, squinting down at the woman's face. Huh? Who's the lucky gal? He paused, clearly trying to puzzle out my question. Then, what the hell are you talking about, man? Okay, so it was a prank. If he had secretly gotten married and wanted to hide it from his family, then he wouldn't have mailed me an announcement. From the confusion in his voice, I figured he wasn't in on the joke. It sounded like one of his friends pulled one over on him. I explained the situation, then sent him a photo of the card. Instead of laughing it off like I expected, David got so quiet I thought the call had dropped. He eventually said he had no idea who Emma was, nor had he sent me the card. Sure, some of his friends were pranksters, but how would any of them have gotten my address without David's knowledge? He said he'd ask his friends about it, and requested that I see who else had received the wedding announcement. Up until that point, I'd still thought of the card as a harmless joke, but the severity of David's reaction put me on edge. Maybe there's actually was some woman in his life that, for whatever reason, he didn't want people knowing about. After the call, I texted my parents and a few of our family friends. One of my old neighbors had indeed received the card, and seemed a little disappointed when I revealed it was only a prank. My parents checked their mailbox upon my request, and only then did they find the announcement. Thank God I called before they could discover it on their own. I genuinely think my mom would have had a heart attack. So far, those are the only 2 households that have received the cards, and I found it bizarre that David's friend knew either of those addresses. Before I fell asleep, I texted David on my update. He said that he hadn't yet found the culprit and planned to continue his search in the morning. Again, I was somewhat perturbed by his seriousness. Was I missing something? I spent the next few hours trying to figure out who his bride could have been. In doing so, I quickly started to feel like every other woman on earth was named Emma. There were so many significant women in mine and David's lives who bore that name that sorting through all of them seemed pointless. There was, for example, our childhood friend and neighbor who David harbored an unrequited crush on for years, until her family moved away. There had been a tragic accident at our high school, in which an Emma in David's year fell headfirst behind some lockers, dying from positional asphyxia. I had dragged David along to a rager at an Emma's house in college, which had ended in both of us spending a night in jail for public intoxication. Apparently, my life was just one big stream of Emmas, and none of them seemed plausibly linked to the marriage announcements. Now, here's the part of all of this that I'm still struggling to make sense of. The night after I called David about the card, I woke up in the middle of the night to my phone ringing. I checked the caller ID and saw that it was David. I assumed he was calling me about the stupid prank, and part of me wanted to ignore him until the morning. Then again, he could have been having some kind of emergency, so I picked up a phone and grumbled "what" into the mic, and then I was shocked to hear a woman's voice on the other end. "Hello," said the voice, quiet and slow and unmistakably feminine. I sat up in bed. "What? David? Who is this?" I double-checked the screen and confirmed it was in fact David's number. Another long pause, and then, "Yes, this is David's apartment." After that, the caller hung up. Disturbed, I called David back immediately, but no one picked up. I sent him a text asking who had just called, then called him 3 more times. No one picked up, and I was starting to panic. Yeah, I know the most likely explanation was that he was simply had a woman over, but something didn't feel right. I guess David's paranoia was rubbing off on me, because I was so weirded out that I actually phoned David's buddy Mike, who lived in the same apartment building, and made him do a wellness check for me. When Mike got to the apartment, my brother was asleep inside, perfectly safe and sound. He didn't have anyone over, and there was no signs that anyone had broken into his apartment or messed with his phone. And yet I hadn't imagined the call, at least not entirely. According to the phone logs, there had definitely been an outbound call from David's phone to mine. He had no memory of calling, and even if David had a history of sleep talking, which he doesn't, the voice certainly didn't sound like a man impersonating a woman. I'm at a complete loss. I tried giving the card a more thorough look this morning, trying to see if I'd glossed over some clue. The longer I stared at the woman in the photo, the more creeped out I got. Why was Emma covering her eyes? If someone had gone through the trouble of creating fake couple photos, why not give Emma a more natural pose? Frankly, I could only look at the marriage announcement for a few seconds at a time before I had to put it down. Maybe that's why it took me so long to realize that the woman's mouth had been flipped upside down. And unfortunately, that's the end of this post. There's no more updates, which really sucks because I was really getting into this story. But yeah, let's get into the next one. Something happened 63 years ago that haunted me my entire life. I've never told anybody about it until now. It's official. I'm an old man. For the last couple years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s, but math is simple and unforgiving. Today is my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes. This is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. In fact, once I cast my vote against the goddamn Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations, if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I found though that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I never told anybody this story because it scares me, almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950. The setting, a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mom was a chore whore. Boy, was I proud of myself when I came up with that one. So I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was a place to be at that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly the children's books, was meager to say least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I would find no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I should expect to be associated with. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep in until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library. And by bike, I mean rusty log of shit attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady actually interrupted my incessant tongue clicking to a hissa, "Shut the fuck up," at me, the first time I ever heard a grown-up use the F word. Big fucking deal. I know, but in those days it was unheard of. The dreary days turned into woeful weeks. I had actually begun praying for school to start again, until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library, but one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection, I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That's where it all began. The door was windowless and made from oak that looked far older than the wall in which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was the appeared to be a single footprint. I had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I could encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to, which I actually found was far more subtle. A small string dangling above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as if though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase, made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into darkness. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library, the most perfect library imaginable. I gasped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles. Both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my god, the smell was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice to say that I never smelled anything better, not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never noticed it before? Why was nobody else here? There were the questions I should have been asking, but I was intoxicated. As I gazed around all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought: I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid for me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed the book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat, always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin barren and directly across from myself. That armchair was mine. The other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then much better than I can now, but it wasn't mine. That's for damn sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple of classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate, a gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually our guest went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing. That didn't matter. The workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure: knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognize that the smell was actually the same as it had been before, the mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was the nasal version of an optical illusion, you know, the one that looks like a young woman glancing backward, but all of a sudden you see that it's really an old woman facing towards you. You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The spell was broken. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one tile, a large, leather-bound cover of a solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. That was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood-red ink atop the first page. "Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie." I stared at this sentence, mesmerized. As I began to retreat to my chair, I turned a page. Blink. The smell became stronger. Another page. Blink. And the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see. My own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit. When I heard the man let out a chuckle, I stared at him disbelievingly. "Who are you?" I asked, panic in my voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat, once again, in his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing at the pile of sick in the carpet. "The smell, it does take some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight you will know hardship like you've never known before," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all the other storms which lie ahead." I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. "Your mother is dead, my boy, by her own hand, in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I'd admit," he said in sorrowful tones, but was there a playful glint in his eye? "Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one." My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old, raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. "Nothing but your friendship, dear boy," he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expounded, "I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble, and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe, when I'm done," he sighed tiredly, running his bony fingers through his thin white hair, "maybe then my work can be yours." I stood up, shuffling toward the door but never breaking his gaze. "You're crazy," I told him. "My mom isn't dead. She's not." "See for yourself if you must," he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. "Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever," he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room, "you know where to find me." I slammed through the door behind me, took the decrepit stairs 2 at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying, he must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes, heart pounding. I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I lived in that small town in Maine my entire life. Although I've kept mostly clear of the public library, once in my late 20s I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear began to morph into idle curiosity. When the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall, I asked the librarian what had happened to the basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. There was no basement, she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had heard her facts correctly, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in the area. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long ago birthday when I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood. I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money, and beat me to within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it. And again, when she miscarried our fourth, when our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick, completely shit-faced and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now, I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now, I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library, and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past the library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I've been more frightened to keep living. The old man was right. My road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it'll get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief, a refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him. I found some home videos of my family that shouldn't exist. My brother died when I was 7 years old. He was 13. He drowned in the lake down in the street from our house. My parents never touched his room. They tried once, but they couldn't do it. Too raw. After that, the door just stayed shut. His room became a kind of museum of him. That was 11 years ago. his room still looks the same. This morning, while I was packing for college, I thought I'd finally go in there. My plan wasn't anything dramatic. I just wanted to grab a few hoodies, maybe a keepsake or two to take with me. Something to hold on to when I got homesick. Full transparency, I've been in his room plenty of times before. I've sat on his bed, I've looked through his shelves, but I've never really gone digging. That felt wrong, and I really had no inclination to. I just missed my brother. That wasn't my intention today either. It wasn't my intention to find a stack of DVDs shoved in the bottom drawer of his dresser. There were 3 of them, just labeled 1, 2, and 3. The only DVD player in the house is still hooked up to his old TV. Everything else went streaming years ago. For a minute I told myself not to do it. They weren't mine, they probably didn't matter. I picked up some of the items I had collected, put the DVD back in his drawer, and returned to my room. Tonight they started calling to me. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking it was just my curiosity eating at me, but it wasn't like that. It felt physical, a pull in my chest. So I crept back across the hall, slipped into his room, locked the door behind me so my parents wouldn't hear, and I put in the first DVD. It was a home video. I didn't even know we had any. I don't remember my parents ever owning a camera. The video starts with static, then clears just enough to show something. The picture is muddy, warped. It could be a living room, but the furniture looks wrong. Everything is too big or too small, shifting every time the frame jitters. Sometimes it almost looks like a bedroom, sometimes like a hallway. No faces, no clear shapes, just flickering shadows that don't match what the voices are saying. Because there are voices, familiar ones, laughter, clinking dishes, and my mom calling my brother's name. It sounds like the family in the background, just out of sight. I hear my brother's laughter, and the sound swallows me whole. It rings through my head, bouncing off the bones that make up my skull. Then, beneath it is another voice. Low, deliberate, close enough that you couldn't miss it. You haven't noticed yet. Then the video cuts off, just like that. I scrambled to replay it, not even thinking about the other 2 discs still stacked under the TV. I just wanted to hear him laugh again. That laugh. I tried not to think about the end, though the fear of what is crawling slowly up against my spine as I hit play, because the way it spoke, it sounded like it wasn't part of the recording at all, like it was speaking to the camera, to me. I pressed play again, this time pausing every few seconds, desperate to make any sense of what I was seeing, but nothing held still. Everything on the film looked almost familiar, like a room you swear you've been in but can't place. The walls are a little too narrow, and the colors are washed out enough to make it something you've never seen before. It made me feel like my brain was short-circuiting. Then I froze, the frame just before the moment he laughed, and there it was. A caption, faint and yellow, burned into the corner of the screen. July 30, 2015. 7 months after my brother drowned. My first thought was that it was a glitch. It had to be. The camera must have been off by a year. There's no other explanation. I forced myself to breathe and to shove back the rising panic. Then I pressed play again. His laugh filled the room, and for a second, my fear washed away. It was just him again. He was alive, warm, and present. A bittersweet rush of comfort and grief. But then the voice returned. Closer this time, wet against the microphone, broken and cutting in and out of static. You noticed. I ripped the DVD out of the player and threw it across the room. I didn't even know why I did it. Adrenaline, I guess. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't control myself. I'm trying to think of logical explanations. I want to believe there's one, but every reason I come up with feels paper thin. I just bolted back to my room and dove under the covers, like that would help. I don't want to watch the other videos, I don't, but I feel them pulling at me, like they're not finished, like I owe them something. I can't sleep. It's dark, it's late, the rain just started. The bathroom faucet always drips, but tonight it sounds so much louder. You could almost confuse it for footsteps. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and make sure you let me know which story was your favorite. I personally really love the Skinwalker Prisoner one, the first one. I always love Skinwalker stories. I always think they're so scary, and that one was very well written. But yeah, with that being said, if you liked the video, make sure you leave a like and think about subscribing. It really helps me out a lot. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching.